Every single evening without fail, a young widow in a torn wrapper cooked a pot of porridge over a small fire outside her crumbling hut and shared every spoonful with children who had no one in the world. She had almost nothing, but she gave anyway every single day, asking for nothing in return. Then, one afternoon, 2 Rolls Royce vehicles rolled slowly down the dusty path toward her hut, and nothing in Abba would ever be the same again. If you love emotional stories about kindness, betrayal, shocking secrets, and the kind of justice that makes you want to stand up and clap, this story is for you. Now, sit back, grab your popcorn, and get comfortable. This one will stay with you long after it ends. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us which country are you watching from and what is your local time right now. We love seeing you here from all over the world. This is Korka's story. Kindness never goes unwitnessed. The city of Abba woke up the same way it always did, loud, dusty, and hungry. By 5 in the morning, the Ariaria market was already alive. Wheelbarrows scraped against cracked asphalt. Generators coughed to life. Women balanced enormous trays on their heads and moved through the narrow corridors between stalls like water finding its way through stone. The air smelled of palm oil, dried fish, and the particular sharpness of a city that never truly slept. Korka was always among the first to arrive. She was 27 years old, but the way she carried herself, quiet, deliberate, unhurried, made her seem older. Not tired old, wise old. She had a thin frame wrapped in a faded green and yellow ankara, her hair tied back under a simple cloth. Her stall was small, wedged between a pepper seller and a man who repaired old shoes. She sold vegetables, tomatoes, garden eggs, ugu leaves, bitter leaf arranged neatly on a wooden plank balanced across 2 crates. She had been coming to this market since she was 19. First with her mother, then with her husband Emmanuel, and now alone. Emmanuel had been gone 2 years. A construction site accident. A scaffolding that was never properly secured. A company that paid a small sum offered condolences and moved on. Korka had no children, no property, just this stall, the small hut she rented at the edge of town, and a stubbornness about her that her mother called pride and Korka called survival. She did not talk about Emmanuel often, but sometimes in the early morning, when the market was still half asleep and the light came in golden and sideways between the stall rooftops, she would stop what she was doing and go very still the way a person does when they are listening for something they know they will not hear. And then she would exhale and get back to work. That Tuesday morning, a bent old woman named Mama Chidinma arrived at her usual spot beside Korka, only to find it already taken a young man had spread his provisions across the space before dawn. Mama Chidinma stood there with her tray of dried crayfish balanced on her head, looking around with the bewildered expression of someone who had just found a stranger sitting in their chair. Korka watched for a moment. Then she quietly shifted her own crates 6 inches to the left, compressing her own space, and waved Mama Chidinma over. "Come, there is room. But your tomatoes, they will still sell." Korka smiled. "Come and sit down before that tray breaks your neck." Mama Chidinma settled in beside her, muttering blessings under her breath. Across the corridor, from behind a large display of expensive imported fabrics, a woman watched this exchange and curled her lip. Her name was Ngozi Adeyemi. She was 35, sharp-faced, and wore her gold jewelry the way some people wear armor, loudly and at all times. Her slab was the biggest in that section of the market. She had 3 assistants, a generator of her own, and the kind of voice that carried whether she meant it to or not. She had never liked Korka. There was something about the younger woman's quietness that irritated her, the way Korka refused to haggle, viciously, refused to spread rumors, refused to compete. In Ngozi's world, everybody was competing. Those who pretended otherwise were simply hiding their ambitions better. "Foolish woman," Ngozi muttered, turning back to her fabrics. giving away her space for a smelly old crayfish seller. Her assistant, a teenage girl named Chisholm, wisely said nothing. The afternoon heat was brutal. By 2 o'clock the market had thinned. Most serious buyers had come and gone. Korka counted what she had made: 4,800 naira. Enough for tomorrow's stock. Enough for the rice she needed. She wrapped the money carefully inside her brassiere, the way her mother had taught her, packed the unsold vegetables into a small cooler, and began preparing for the part of her day she never skipped. Behind the back wall of the Ariaria market, where the formal stalls ended and the city's indifference began, there was a strip of open ground, partly covered by a corrugated iron sheet nailed between 2 concrete pillars. It was not much, but for 6 children between the ages of 6 and 12, it was the closest thing to a home they had. Their names were Tunde Amara Bisi, Little Chucks Ngele, and a tiny girl everyone called Mama B because she was 4 years old and bossy beyond her years. Korka knew every name. She knew that Tunde liked his porridge with extra salt. She knew that Amara was secretly teaching herself to read using discarded newspapers. She knew that Bisi had a cough that came back every Harmattan season, and she kept a small sachet of mentholated rub in her bag specifically for him. Every evening she brought a pot. Not a large pot, she could not afford large. A medium-sized aluminium pot, dented on one side with a lid that no longer sat quite flat. She cooked ogie with groundnuts or rice with a thin stew, or the plain thick porridge she called NRI Osha clean food, which the children had come to love because she always found a way to make it taste like more than it was. She set up her small kerosene stove on a flat stone, unpacked the pot, and within minutes the smell of cooking drew the children from wherever they had scattered. Tunde arrived first as always, skidding to a stop in front of her and holding out both hands like a supplicant. "Auntie Korka, I have been waiting since afternoon." "And yet the afternoon came and went, and you survived," she said, not looking up from the pot. Amara arrived the next newspaper tucked under her arm, and sat cross-legged without a word. Then Bisi coughing. Korka reached into her bag without being asked and handed him the mentholated rub. He took it with the automatic ease of a child who has learned he can rely on a thing. They ate, they talked, the children talked mostly, Korka listened mostly. Tunde had a story about a man who had dropped a 500 naira note near the bus stop. Mama B had bitten a much older boy who had tried to take her mango. Amara had learned 4 new words from the newspaper, and she recited them seriously: Economy Senator, Infrastructure, Petroleum. "Very good," Korka said. "Now use economy in a sentence." Amara thought hard. "The economy of this stew is that there is not enough meat." The children erupted. Even Korka laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind that looked like surprise. It was during this moment, Korka, laughing with a group of dirty, bright-eyed, parentless children in the fading light behind a market, that a man standing at the far end of the lane stopped walking. He was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged. Plain gray trousers, a simple kaftan-worn sandals. He carried a small nylon bag as though he'd just done some shopping. Nobody paid him any attention. He stood and watched for nearly 2 minutes. He watched the way Korka made sure every child had eaten before she touched the pot herself. He watched the way she wiped Mama B's face with the hem of her own wrapper. He watched the way she listened to Amara's vocabulary recital with her full attention, as though there was nowhere else in the world she was supposed to be. Then he turned and walked away. He pulled out his phone as he went. Dialed a number. "Tunde," he said quietly when the line connected. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week. I am staying in Aba." He ended the call and kept walking, disappearing into the evening crowd without looking back. He had seen enough for one day. The next morning arrived with rain. It came without warning, the way Aba rain always did. One moment the sky was pale and ordinary, and the next fat drops were hammering the iron rooftops like an announcement. Korka was already at her stall when it started hurriedly dragging her crates under the narrow overhang covering her tomatoes with a piece of old tarpaulin. Around her, the market scrambled. Traders cursed. Buyers ran. The gutters along the corridor began to fill and overflow, sending brown water across the concrete floor in thin rivers. Korka worked quietly and methodically. She was used to rain. She was used to most things. It was when the scramble had settled and the market had reorganized itself under shelter that she looked up and saw her mother. Ba Aisha was standing at the entrance of the corridor, a plastic bag in each hand, her church blouse dark with rain at the shoulders. She was 58 years old and had the build of a woman who had spent her whole life carrying things wide at the hips, strong in the arms, but with a face that showed every worry she had ever tried to hide. She was looking at Korka with an expression that sat somewhere between relief and guilt. Korka felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Her mother only came to Abba unannounced when something was wrong. "Mama." Korka came around the stall and took the plastic bags from her hands. "Why didn't you call me? I would have sent money for a proper bus, not... I took the early bus. It was fine." Ba Aisha waved the concern away and cupped Korka's face in both hands, studying her the way mothers do, checking for weight loss for shadows, under the eyes for evidence of suffering. "You look thin." "I am not thin. Sit down." She found her mother a stool behind the stall, bought her a sachet of water and a small meat pie from the passing hawker, and waited. Her mother ate, drank, looked at the rain, said nothing for a while. "Mama," Korka said finally, "whatever it is, just say it." Ba Aisha set down the meat pie, folded her hands in her lap, and said it. The debt was 800,000 naira. It had started 3 years ago, a loan taken from Chief Obiora Nwachukwu to repair the family house after flooding damaged the foundation. The agreement had seemed reasonable at the time, but the interest had compounded. The payments had slipped. And now Chief Obiora was no longer interested in waiting. He wanted the land. The family land in Umueze, the plot where Korka's grandparents had built the first house where her father had been buried, where the mango tree her mother had planted the year Korka was born, still stood. That land was what Chief Obiora now held as collateral. "He came to the house last week," Ba Aisha said, her voice carefully flat, in the way of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. "He brought documents. He said if we can not pay by the end of next month, he will take the land and register it in his name." Korka said nothing. She was looking at the rain. "But he also said..." Her mother paused, took a breath. "He said there is another way." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. "He wants to marry you," Ba Aisha said quietly. "He said if you agree, he will cancel the debt. All of it. He said he will also give your brother money to finish his education." He said, "Mama." Korka's voice was soft but very clear. "Stop. Korka." I said, "Stop." They sat with that for a moment. Then Korka turned to look at her mother. Not with anger, with something more tiring than anger. "You came here to ask me to marry Chief Obiora Nwachukwu." Ba Aisha looked at her hands. "I came to tell you the situation." "The situation." Korka repeated the word as though testing its weight. "Mama, that man is 60 years old. He has buried 2 wives. Everyone in Umueze knows how those women lived in his house. Everyone knows." "People exaggerate, do they?" Korka leaned forward. "Do they exaggerate the part where his second wife was not allowed to visit her own family for 3 years? Do they exaggerate that part, Mama?" Ba Aisha had no answer. The rain was letting up now, thinning to a quiet drizzle. "I will find another way to handle the debt," Korka said. "I don't know how yet, but I will find a way. What I will not do is sell myself to clear a debt I did not create." Her mother's eyes filled. "I am not asking you to sell yourself. I am asking you to think about the family. I am always thinking about the family. I have been thinking about the family since I was 19 years old. Korka stood moved back to her crates, began rearranging tomatoes that did not need rearranging just to have something to do with her hands. Stay and eat lunch with me. We will talk about something else. Ba Aisha wiped her eyes with the corner of her blouse and said nothing more. Chief Obira arrived 2 hours later. He had not been invited. He never was arrival without invitation was for him simply the natural behavior of a man who believed his presence was always welcome. He was broad, dark-suited despite the heat with a walking stick he did not need but carried for effect. 3 boys trailed behind him, carrying nothing existing only to suggest that he was the kind of man who traveled with an entourage. He stopped in front of Korka's stall, looked her over the way a man looks at something he has already decided to purchase. Korka! His voice was deep and self-satisfied. Your mother told me she was coming to speak with you today. I thought I would save everyone time. You should have saved yourself the trip, Korka said pleasantly, not looking up from her tomatoes. Chief Obiora chuckled, as though she had said something endearing. He turned to Ba Aisha. You see, this is what I like about her, spirited. He said spirited the way men say it when they mean not yet broken. There is nothing to discuss here, Chief Obiora, Korka said, still pleasant, still not looking at him. My answer is no. It will continue to be no. You are welcome to take the matter to whatever authority you like. The chuckle faded. Chief Obura straightened his jacket. The entourage shuffled. His voice dropped half a register. You are making a mistake, young woman. A very expensive mistake. Then it is my mistake to make. She finally looked up and met his eyes directly. Thank you for coming. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away, his walking stick clicking against the wet concrete. From across the corridor, half hidden behind a bolt of imported lace, Ngozi Adeyemi watched the entire exchange. Her expression was unreadable, but her mind was already moving. She had found exactly what she needed. Far from the rain-soaked corridors of Ariaria Market, in a corner office on the 14th floor of a glass building in Abuja, a phone rang. Mr. Tunde Fashola picked it up before the second ring. He was 50 years old, slim, and had the particular stillness of a man who had spent decades anticipating what other people needed before they asked. He had worked for Chairman Chukwuemeka Osei for 18 years. In that time, he had learned 2 things above all else. The chairman did not make small decisions, and the chairman did not repeat himself. Tunde. The voice on the line was calm, unhurried. I need a full report on the woman at Ariaria Market, the vegetable seller. Her name is Korka. Find out everything, her background, her circumstances, the children she feeds, who her enemies are. Quietly. Nothing moves in that market without someone noticing. Understood, Chairman. How soon do you need this? By tomorrow evening. Yes, sir. The line went dead. Mr. Tunde set down the phone and reached for his notebook. He had sent field contacts to Abba 3 weeks ago after an anonymous tip reached the Osei Foundation, a letter handwritten on torn notebook paper from a woman who identified herself only as a market trader who believes in doing right. The letter described a young widow in Ariaria who fed orphaned children every evening from her own meager earnings, asking for nothing, refusing charity herself, turning away help with the same quiet firmness with which she gave it. The foundation received dozens of such letters every year. Most were genuine. Some were exaggerated. A few were outright fabrications by people hoping to receive funds themselves. But this one had felt different. Mr. Tunde had dispatched a contact to verify. The contact had returned with the same report word for word. She is exactly what the letter says she is. That was when Mr. Tunde had informed the chairman, and that was when the chairman had said without any particular drama, I will go myself. Chukwuemeka Osei was 42 years old, though most people who met him casually guessed older, not because he looked worn, but because he had the unhurried quality of a man who no longer needed to prove anything. He had built Ose Holdings from a single logistics company. His father left him into a conglomerate with interests in real estate, agriculture, shipping, and telecommunications. Forbes had listed him 3 years running. He had residences in Abuja, Lagos, and London. None of that was visible in the man who had been moving through Ariaria Market for the past week in plain gray trousers and worn sandals. He had a room in a mid-range guest house 3 streets from the market. He ate suya from the roadside stand near the bus park. He carried a nylon shopping bag. He spoke Igbo with the easy fluency of someone who had grown up hearing it, which he had. His mother had been from Enugu, a seamstress who died of hunger-related illness when Emeka was 11, in a village where no one had thought to help her. He had never forgotten that. The Ose Foundation had been built on that memory. Not as charity, Emeka had no patience for the kind of charity that made givers feel important and receivers feel small. He funded it to find and reward people who helped quietly, without audience, without expectation. People who shared what little they had simply because it was the right thing to do. In 18 years of running the program, he had found 11 such people. Korka would be the 12th if she was what she appeared to be. He had learned to be careful. He had been deceived twice before by people who performed goodness for the benefit of his investigators without realizing they were being observed. Both times the performances had been convincing. Both times a longer period of observation had revealed the truth. This time he had come himself. On Thursday morning, 4 days into his stay in Aba, Emeka bought tomatoes from Korka's stall for the 3rd time. She recognized him now, the quiet man who always paid without bargaining and always said thank you in a way that sounded like he meant it. She had decided he was probably a civil servant or perhaps a retired teacher. He had that careful, watchful quality of a man who had spent years listening to other people. The tomatoes were good, he said, setting down his nylon bag. I made stew yesterday. You cook? She asked, mildly surprised. I learned out of necessity. He picked up a tomato, examined it. I lived alone for many years. No family. Not anymore. He said it simply, without self-pity. My mother died when I was young. Korka looked at him for a moment. Then she wrapped 3 extra tomatoes in a piece of newspaper and added them to his bag without a word. He noticed. He said nothing, but he noticed. That same Thursday evening, Ngozi made her move. It was carefully timed just before Korka's evening routine with the children, when the back corridor behind the market was still visible from the main lane, and a small audience of traders and hawkers were wrapping up their day. Ngozi arrived with 2 boys carrying a large refuse drum between them. She stopped directly in front of Korka's hut entrance, where the narrow path from the market met the open ground. She spoke loudly to no one in particular, which meant to everyone within earshot. Someone should report this area to the sanitation office, she announced. It smells. All this cooking for street children every night, it attracts rats. It makes the whole back of the market dirty. She gestured at the boys. They upended the refuse drum directly across the entrance path. Rotten mango peels, fish bones, wet paper. The smell hit immediately. Several traders turned to look. A few exchanged glances. Nobody said anything. Korka came around the corner at that moment, carrying her aluminium pot. She stopped, looked at the pile of refuse across her path, looked at Ngozi, who met her gaze with a bright, challenging smile. This area is a public space, Ngozi said pleasantly. I can put my rubbish wherever I like. The children had appeared behind Korka, Tunde, Amara, Bisi, the others, and were looking at the mess with wide eyes. Korka looked at it for a long moment. Then she set down her pot, went back to her stall, and returned with a wide broom and a dustpan. She began to sweep. She did not rush. She did not mutter. She swept with the same deliberate quietness with which she did everything methodically thoroughly without any performance of suffering. Ngozi watched, smile fading slightly. This was not the reaction she had wanted. When the path was clear, Korka picked up her pot, stepped over to the flat stone and lit her kerosene stove. "Come," she said to the children. "Food is almost ready." Tunde looked back at Ngozi with an expression far too sharp for a 9-year-old. Then he turned and followed Korka. At the far end of the lane, the man in gray trousers stood still for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the guest house, already composing what he would say to Mr. Tunde tomorrow morning. He had seen enough. He had seen everything. Friday came in clear and dry, the sky over Abba washed pale blue after the week's rain. The market woke up faster on dry days, more buyers, more noise, more of everything. Emeka arrived at Korka's stall at 7:30 earlier than his previous visits. He was carrying his usual nylon bag. He bought a bunch of ugu leaves and a handful of fresh pepper, and when Korka gave him his change, he noticed she had miscounted. She had given him 50 naira too much. He handed it back without comment. She looked at the note in her palm, looked at him. "Most people don't return the extra," she said. "Most people don't notice they received it," he replied. She studied him for a moment with that direct, unhurried gaze of hers, the kind of look that made people feel they were being read rather than simply seen. Then she wrapped the ugu carefully and handed it back. "You have been buying from me every other day this week," she said. "You live near here, nearby," he said, which was true in the sense that 3 streets away was nearby. "You should buy your pepper from Mama Chidinma next door," Korka said, nodding toward the old woman who was just settling onto her stool. "Her pepper is fresher than mine. I don't like to say so, but it is true." Emeka turned and looked at Mama Chidinma, who was arranging her goods with arthritic, careful hands. "Does she know you send business her way?" "Why would I tell her?" Korka said simply, as though the question barely made sense. He bought his pepper from Mama Chidinma. That afternoon he came back. Not to buy, there was nothing left at the stall by 2 o'clock, Korka, having sold out for the second time that week. He found her instead behind the market earlier than usual, starting a small fire under her kerosene stove. She looked up when she heard footsteps, and her expression shifted briefly toward surprise before settling back into its usual composure. "The stall is closed," she said. "I know." He held up his nylon bag. "I brought groundnuts. I thought if you ever use them, I use them in the porridge." She considered him. "Where did you get them?" "From the woman at the bus park junction, the one with the blue umbrella." "Mama Risi." Korka nodded slowly. "Good quality. Sit down if you want." She nodded toward a low concrete block a few feet away. "I won't have conversation, I'll be cooking, but you can sit." It was Emeka, understood an unusual kind of invitation, functional, unsentimental, entirely honest. He sat. He watched her work. She moved around her small setup with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, adjusting the flame, testing the consistency of the porridge with a wooden spoon tasting, and adding a pinch of salt from a small folded paper sachet. Her hands were steady. She hummed something low and tuneless under her breath, apparently unaware that she was doing it. The children began to arrive as the smell spread. Tunde appeared first, as always stopping short when he saw the unfamiliar man sitting on the concrete block. He looked at Korka. "That is Uncle." She glanced at Emeka. "Emeka," he supplied. "Uncle Emeka," Korka said. "He brought the groundnuts." Tunde approached with the solemn assessment of a child who has learned early that adults require evaluation before trust. He stood in front of Emeka and looked at him carefully. "Do you have children?" Tunde asked. "No," Emeka said. "Why not?" "Tunde," Korka said without turning around. "Sit down." Tunde sat, but he kept his eyes on Emeka with undiminished suspicion. Amara arrived next with her newspaper, then BC coughing. Mama B toddled in last, dragging a piece of cloth she used as a blanket, and sitting directly beside Emeka without any evaluation process whatsoever, apparently having decided he was acceptable on sight. Emeka looked down at the tiny girl leaning against his arm. Something shifted in his face. Just briefly, something old and unguarded. They ate as the sun went down. Korka distributed the porridge in the same order every time smallest children first Tunde last, because he was oldest, and she trusted him to wait herself only after the pot had gone around twice, and she was certain everyone had enough. She moved between them, quietly wiping Mama B's chin, checking on BC's cough, listening to Amara's daily vocabulary report with full attention. Emeka ate a small portion she offered him without ceremony, sitting on the concrete block, feeling something he had not felt in a long time and could not immediately name. After a while, Tunde's suspicion thawed enough to permit conversation. He asked Emeka what kind of stew he liked. Emeka said egusi. Tunde said bitterleaf was better. Emeka disagreed respectfully. A serious debate followed, with Amara citing nutritional information she had read in a newspaper, and BC taking Emeka's side purely for the sake of opposition. Korka listened to all of it and said nothing, but the corners of her mouth moved. When the food was finished and Mama B had fallen asleep against Emeka's arm entirely without permission, Korka began packing up her pot. Emeka carefully transferred the sleeping child to a folded cloth on the ground. "She does that to everyone," Korka said. "Don't feel special." "I don't," he said. Though he did. He helped her carry the pot back toward the lane without being asked. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment. Then, Korka said, not looking at him, "You are not a civil servant." It was not a question. Emeka was quiet for 1 step. 2 steps. "What makes you say that, civil servants bargain?" she said. "They check the change twice. They ask for discount on principle." She glanced at him sideways. "You pay what you are asked, and you give back what is not yours. That is either a very poor man or a very rich one." He said nothing. She nodded as though confirming something to herself. "Either way, it is not my business." She took the pot from him at the corner where the path divided. "Thank you for the ground nuts, Uncle Emeka." She turned and walked toward her hut without looking back. Emeka stood at the corner for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone. Dialed. "Tunde," he said quietly. "I need you in Aba by Monday. Bring the full foundation documentation." He paused. "And Tunde, don't drive the company vehicle. Come in something ordinary." He ended the call. Across the lane, half hidden in the shadow of her fabric stall, Ngozi Adeyemi watched Emeka's retreating figure with narrowed eyes. She had noticed him around Korka 3 times now. The plain clothes, the nylon bag, the deliberate ordinariness. It did not add up. She turned to Chisholm. "Find out who that man is," she said quietly. "Ask around. Carefully." Chisholm nodded and disappeared into the evening crowd. Ngozi stood alone for a moment, thinking. Whatever was happening around Korka, she intended to know about it before it became a problem she could not control. The weekend passed quietly. Korka worked Saturday, sold out by noon, came home to find a letter tucked under her door. It was from Mr. Isa, her landlord, a reminder that 2 months of rent remained unpaid, and that he expected settlement by the end of the following week. The figure at the bottom of the letter was written in large underlined numbers, as though he suspected she might miss it otherwise. She folded the letter and put it under her mattress with the others. She had a system. Problems she could solve this week went into her left pocket. Problems she could not yet solve went under the mattress. It was not a perfect system, but it had kept her functional for 2 years, and she had learned not to expect perfection from anything that merely had to work. Sunday, she did not go to the market. She cooked jollof rice on her small stove, brought a pot to the children, sat with them longer than usual. Tunda had found a broken radio somewhere and was convinced he could fix it. He could not, but Korka let him try for 2 hours before quietly suggesting they use the time to help Amara with her reading instead. By Sunday evening, she was almost peaceful. By Monday morning, that peace was gone. Her mother arrived on the first bus from Umueze. Korka saw her from the stall before Ba Aisha saw her. The church blouse again, the plastic bags, the expression that this time sat not between relief and guilt, but somewhere past guilt entirely, in the territory of a woman who has already done the thing she knows is wrong and is now here to explain it. Korka set down the tomato she was holding. "Mama, what have you done?" Ba Aisha sat down on the stool without being invited. She opened one of her plastic bags and took out a document several pages folded in thirds with a red stamp at the bottom. "Chief Obiora came again on Saturday," she said. "He brought his lawyer. Korka, the letter from the land registry, they are serious. Next month is not enough time. I have been calling your brother, but his phone is off, and your Uncle Desmond said it is not his problem. Mama." Korka did not touch the document. "What did you sign?" The question landed in the space between them and sat there. Ba Aisha's hands tightened on the paper. "It is not final. He said it is only a letter of intent. He said it does not become binding unless you also—" "What did you sign?" Her mother looked up. Her eyes were dry. She had already done her crying somewhere else in private before coming here. "A letter of intent for marriage negotiation? On your behalf?" He said it cancels the interest on the debt while the matter is being considered. It buys us time. The market noise continued around them. Somewhere nearby, a woman was arguing about the price of stockfish. A generator coughed. The world did not pause. Korka was very still. "You signed a marriage document," she said quietly, "on my behalf, without asking me. I am your mother. I am a grown woman." Her voice did not rise. It went the other direction, lower, more precise, the way a blade is most dangerous when it moves slowly. "I buried my husband, Mama. I rebuilt my life. I make my own decisions. You know this." "I know." Baisha's composure finally cracked just at the edges. "I know, Korka. But what was I supposed to do, sit and watch them take the land where your father is buried? The mango tree you climbed as a child, I could not—" Her voice broke. She pressed her lips together hard. Korka looked at her mother for a long moment, at the tired face, the worn blouse, the hands that had cooked for her and braided her hair and held her up at Emmanuel's funeral without asking for anything in return. She took a slow breath. "I will not honor the document," she said. "You understand that. Whatever Chief Obiora told you, I will not." Ba Aisha nodded. She had expected this. "But I will not fight you either," Korka continued. "You are my mother, and you were afraid. I understand fear." She folded the document and handed it back. "Go home. Let me think." Chief Obiora did not wait for her to finish thinking. He appeared at the market at 11:30 this time without the walking stick, more businessman than patriarch today, a slim leather portfolio under his arm. He had brought only one person with him, a young man in a suit who had the precise, efficient look of a lawyer who charged by the hour. He stopped at Korka's stall with the same proprietorial ease as before. But something in his manner had changed. The chuckle was gone. He had the expression of a man who believed the paperwork had already settled the question and was here now only as a formality. "Korka," he said, "I believe your mother has spoken to you." "She has," Korka said, arranging her tomatoes. "Good, then you understand the situation is resolved." He glanced at the lawyer, who nodded confirmation. "We will do the introduction ceremony next month. Small family only. The wedding can be. I am not marrying you, Chief Obiora." He blinked. "The document. was signed by my mother without my consent and has no legal standing." She looked up at him directly. "If your lawyer is worth what you are paying him, he already told you that." The lawyer looked at his portfolio. Chief Obuora's face changed. The pleasantness dropped away completely, and what remained underneath was harder and less patient. "You are a stubborn woman," he said. "Stubborn and foolish. You have nothing, no husband, no money, no future. I am offering you a way out, and you are standing here playing market woman." "I am a market woman," Korka said clearly. "That is not an insult." A small crowd had gathered. Traders, hawkers, buyers, who had slowed and stopped. Ngozi, 3 stalls down, stood perfectly still, with her full attention aimed at the scene. Chief Obiora leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped to something that was meant to be private, but was not. "I am a patient man, Korka, but my patience has limits." He straightened his jacket. "Think carefully before our next conversation." He turned and walked away, the lawyer following. The crowd dispersed slowly in the murmuring way of people who have witnessed something and are already deciding how to tell it. Ngozi turned back to her fabric. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Chisholm any news on that man. The reply came back 30 seconds later. "Still asking, but nobody knows him. He pays cash everywhere. No name, no story. It is strange, madam." Ngozi stared at the message. Then she typed back, "Keep looking." That evening, for the first time in many weeks, Korka did not sing while she cooked. Tunde noticed. He sat beside her and said nothing, which for Tunde was the greatest effort of which he was capable. After a long while, he leaned against her arm the way Mama B usually did. Korka looked down at him. She put her arm around his thin shoulders and pulled him close. "There is always enough if you are willing to share." She said it quietly to herself, to the fire, to no one. Then she picked up her spoon and kept cooking. The week moved the way bad weeks do, slowly at the beginning, then all at once. Tuesday was ordinary. Wednesday, Korka sold well and managed to set aside 3,000 naira toward Mr. Aza's rent, tucking the folded notes inside the small tin she kept under her mattress beside the letters. Thursday, the market was slow, a public holiday reducing foot traffic by half. Friday morning, she woke up to find that someone had poured engine oil across the front step of her hut during the night. She cleaned it without telling anyone. She knew who had done it. Knowing and proving were different things, and she had neither the time nor the energy for the particular exhaustion of righteous confrontation. She cleaned the step, put on her wrapper, and went to the market. What she did not know was that Friday had been selected, that the events of that afternoon had been arranged the way a stage is arranged, props placed, positions assigned, audience gathered before the main actor arrives. Mr. Iza came to the market at 2 o'clock. He was a thin man in his late 50s with small eyes that rarely settled on one thing for long. He was not naturally cruel in another life. With different incentives he might have been unremarkable. But Ngozi had spoken to him Wednesday evening, and the conversation had included a figure that made his small eyes go very still. He found Korka at her stall packing up the last of her goods. "Miss Korka." He stopped in front of her, hands clasped, voice carrying the strained formality of someone delivering a prepared speech. "I'm sorry to come here like this, but the rent situation 3 months now." 2 months, Korka said without looking up. "The third is not yet due." 2 months, yes, 42,000 naira. He cleared his throat. "I need it today, all of it." Korka looked up at him. The agreement was end of week. The agreement has changed. He would not quite meet her eyes. "I need the space. There's another tenant." "Mr. Iza." Her voice was quiet and precise. "We have an agreement. End of this week. Today is Friday. The week has not ended. I need the money today, Miss Korka." His voice firmed the way voices do when someone has been paid to be firm. If you cannot pay, I will need you to vacate the property by this evening." The words fell into the air and stayed there. Around them, the afternoon market had reached that particular stillness that gathers when people are pretending not to listen. 3 stalls down, Ngozi stood with her arms folded. She had brought Chisholm and 2 other women positioned casually, naturally, the way people position themselves when they have come to watch something. Chief Obira stood near the market entrance, not approaching, just present. A reminder. "I do not have 42,000 naira today," Korka said. She said it without shame, without apology, as a statement of plain fact. "I will have it by Sunday. That was the understanding. Today, Miss Korka, or the hut must be vacated." Silence. Then Ngozi's voice bright and carrying, "She cannot pay. Everyone knows she cannot pay. She spends all her money feeding children that are not even hers. What kind of woman does that and cannot afford her own rent?" Several people turned. More stopped walking. "At least I spend what is mine," Korka said, looking at Ngozi directly. "Not what belongs to others." Ngozi's eyes narrowed. "What is that supposed to mean?" "You know what it means." The crowd thickened. This was the market conflict was entertainment, and entertainment drew people the way food drew flies. Ngozi stepped forward. "You want to talk? Let us talk then. You are a nobody, Korka. A widow with no family, no money, no sense. You feed other people's children and cannot feed your own future. You chase away a good man. I chased away nothing I wanted to keep. Chief Obiora is a wealthy man. Chief Obiora is a bully in a good suit." Korka's voice was still level, but something underneath it had gone very tight. "And so are you. And both of you are welcome to stand here in this market and talk about my life until you run out of words. It will not change my answer." Ngozi stared at her. Something ugly moved across her face. She turned to Mr. Iza. "She cannot pay. Remove her things." "You do not give orders here," Korka said. But Mr. Iza had already made his calculation. He gestured to 2 young men who had been waiting, also positioned, also arranged, and they moved toward the hut entrance. "You cannot," Korka stepped forward. "It is my property," Mr. A's said, finally meeting her eyes, and in them she saw not a cruelty but something worse, apology mixed with determination. He had made his choice and was going to live with it. "I am sorry, Miss Korka. Please stand aside." She stood aside, because there was nothing else to do. She watched as her crates came out first, then the small table. The mattress, her mattress, Emmanuel's old blanket still folded on top of it. The tin with the rent money. The cooking things. All of it arranged on the dusty ground in front of the hut with the brutal indifference of objects separated from their meaning. Tunde appeared from somewhere behind the crowd. He looked at the pile of Korka's belongings on the ground, and his face did something complicated, the face of a child who knows what it means to have your things put outside. He went and stood next to Korka without speaking. Then Amara came. Then Bisi. Then Mama B, who did not understand what was happening but understood that Korka needed people near her, and stood against her leg with both hands gripping the fabric of her wrapper. The crowd watched. Chief Obira moved, then stepping forward from the entrance, unhurried, measuring the moment. He stopped in front of Korka with the expression of a man who has rehearsed his lines and is pleased with them. "I told you my patience has limits," he said, not unkindly. That was the worst part, the gentleness in his voice, as though he was doing her a favor. "Come with me now. I will pay Mr. Asa, I will arrange proper accommodation, and we will not speak of this again." Korka looked at him. She looked at her mattress on the ground, at Emmanuel's blanket, at the tin with 3,000 naira in it, everything she had managed to save this week. She looked at Tunde, who was watching her with the focused attention of a child, waiting to learn something important about how the world works. "No," she said. Chief Obiora blinked. "No," she said again more clearly. "I will sleep on the ground before I go anywhere with you." The crowd murmured. Chief Obiora's face darkened. He opened his mouth, and then from somewhere down the lane came the sound of an engine. Not a kiki, not a danfo. Something heavier, smoother, the particular purr of machinery that costs more than most people in this market would earn in a decade. Then another identical sound just behind it. Heads turned. Two black vehicles moved slowly down the lane toward the market entrance, parting the crowd the way a current parts water. Long, low, immaculate. Rolls Royce, both of them. The crowd went very quiet. Korka stood in front of her scattered belongings, Tunde pressed against her side, and watched the vehicles slow to a stop. The front door of the lead car opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out. The man in the dark suit was Mr. Tunde Fashola. He was 50 years old, slim, and moved with the particular economy of someone who had spent decades operating in rooms where everything mattered. He wore no jewelry except a simple watch. His suit was charcoal gray, well cut without ostentation, the kind that announced quality without requiring announcement. He stepped out of the lead vehicle, straightened his jacket once, and looked around the crowd with calm, unhurried eyes until he found what he was looking for. "Miss Korka," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. The market had gone quiet enough that it did not need to be loud. No one moved. Korka stood in front of her scattered belongings, the mattress. Emmanuel's blanket, the dented pot, the small tin, and looked at the man who had just spoken her name. She did not recognize him, but something in the way he said her name precisely and without question, as though he had known exactly where she would be standing, made the back of her neck go still. "Yes," she said. Mr. Tunde nodded as though confirming something to himself. Then he turned back to the lead vehicle and opened the rear door. The crowd watched. A man stepped out. He was wearing a suit the color of storm clouds, perfectly tailored, moving with him rather than on him. A Patek Philippe watch caught the afternoon light for just a moment. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, and he carried himself with the complete stillness of someone who had long ago stopped needing to perform confidence because the real thing had replaced it entirely. Korka looked at him. Her mouth opened slightly, closed. It was the man from the market. The man with the nylon bag and the worn sandals. The man who had returned her extra 50 naira without comment and bought his pepper from Mama Chidinma and sat on a concrete block eating porridge with her children. But he was not that man. Or rather, he was exactly that man. And also something else entirely. Emeka walked forward through the crowd which parted for him without being asked the way crowds part, for things they do not yet understand but instinctively recognize. He stopped in front of Korka. His eyes took in everything: the mattress on the ground, Emmanuel's blanket, the children clustered around her, the tin with its small savings, Tunde pressed against her side. His expression did not change, but something behind it moved. He turned. Ngozi was 3 feet to his left, arms still folded, expression cycling rapidly between confusion and the first cold edge of something that was not yet fear, but was adjacent to it. She had good instincts, had always had good instincts, and her instincts were presently screaming at a frequency she could not quite process. She stepped forward anyway. Instinct and pride had always been at war in her, and pride usually won. "Who are you?" she demanded. Her voice was still loud. Still carrying, she had not yet recalibrated to the new situation. "What do you want here?" She is nobody, a beggar woman, a mad woman who cannot pay her rent and feeds street children instead of... Her name, Emeka said, is Korka. He said it quietly. He did not raise his voice, he simply said it, and the certainty in those 4 words was so absolute that Ngozi stopped speaking mid-sentence as though a hand had covered her mouth. Emeka turned back to Korka fully. Miss Korka, he said. My name is Chukwemeka Ose. I have been in Aba for 3 weeks. He paused. I have been watching you. The crowd murmured. Korka did not move. I run a foundation, he continued. For the past 18 years we have searched for people who give without audience, people who help the forgotten, not because they are being watched, but because it is simply who they are. He looked at her steadily. You are the 12th person we have found in 18 years. Silence. 6 weeks ago, said Mr. Tunde, stepping forward slightly, addressing the crowd now as much as Korka, our foundation received a letter about a woman in Ariaria Market, a widow who fed orphan children every evening from her own earnings, who gave away market space to elderly traders, who refused charity herself but never refused to give it. He paused. Chairman Osei came to verify personally. Everything in that letter was true. And more. Chief Obiora had been backing slowly toward the market entrance. He had almost made it. Chief Obiora Nwachukwu. Mr. Tunde's voice did not rise, but it turned. Please stay where you are. Chief Obiora stopped. Mr. Tunde reached into his jacket and produced a document. Our legal team has reviewed the debt arrangement between your family and Chief Obiora Miss Korka. The interest calculations are fraudulent. The original loan amount was 450,000 naira. With legal interest, the current debt is 580,000. Not 800,000. He looked at Chief Obiora. The discrepancy has been reported to the appropriate authorities. Chief Obiora opened his mouth, closed it. The debt, Emeka said quietly, has been settled, as of this morning. He looked at Mr. Eze, who had gone the color of old ash. Mr. Eze, Miss Korka's rent all outstanding amounts has been paid through the end of the year. Her belongings will be returned to her hut immediately. Mr. Eze looked at the 2 young men he had hired. They were already picking up Korka's crates. Ngozi had not moved since Emeka had spoken her name. She stood perfectly still, her gold jewelry suddenly seeming very loud in the silence. Emeka turned to her. Madam Ngozi Adeyemi, he said. The refuse incident last Thursday. The engine oil on Miss Korka's step on Friday morning. The arrangement with Mr. Eze. He said each thing calmly without heat, the way a man reads a list. Our team documented all of it. Ngozi's face had gone rigid. I will not involve the authorities today, Emeka said. That is Miss Korka's decision to make, not mine. But I suggest you consider very carefully how you conduct yourself in this market going forward. He turned away from her. He was finished with her. He looked at the children. Tunde was staring up at him with the expression of someone who has been keeping a suspicion for some time and has just been proven right. Amara had her newspaper pressed against her chest. Mama B had walked forward and was standing directly in front of Emeka, looking up at him with complete calm. Emeka crouched down to her level. Hello, he said. Hello, Mama B said. Are you rich? From somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed a real laugh, sudden and releasing, and then others followed, and the tension broke like a fever. Emeka looked up at Korka. Something in his expression had shifted the careful, measured look of the past 3 weeks, replaced by something simpler and less guarded. I have also arranged a temporary foundation for 40 children in the Ariaria area, he said, standing. Housing food medical care schooling, beginning next week. He paused. I wanted you to know before I made any announcement, because none of this would exist without you. Korka looked at him for a long moment. She looked at her hut, where her things were already being carried back inside. She looked at the children around her, Tunde, Amara, Bisi, Mama B, who were watching this with the focused attention of people at the center of something they do not yet fully understand. She looked back at Emeka. Why? She asked. Her voice was steady, but only just. "Why all of this? You could have sent money through the foundation. You did not need to come yourself. You did not need to sit on a concrete block and eat porridge and argue about a goosey stew with a 9-year-old. She stopped. Her voice had done something it was not supposed to do. Emeka was quiet for a moment. "My mother died hungry," he said simply, "and no one helped her." He held her gaze. "I needed to see with my own eyes that someone like you existed, not just be told." The market was very quiet. Tunde looked up at Korka, then at Emeka, then back at Korka. "Auntie Korka," he said, in the carrying voice of a child who has no concept of a private moment. "I think he likes you." The crowd erupted. Korka pressed her hand over her face. Emeka looked at Tunde with an expression that was doing its best to remain dignified. "We have a private matter to discuss," he said to Korka over the noise. The laughter, the beginning of 100 conversations that would spread across Abba before nightfall. "When you are ready, no rush." Korka lowered her hand. Her eyes were bright. "No rush," she agreed. The story spread the way fire spreads in Harmattan, fast total and in every direction at once. By Friday evening, every trader in Ariaria Market knew that Chairman Chukwuemeka Ose of Ose Holdings had come personally to Abba in plain clothes and sat among street children eating porridge. By Saturday morning it had reached the bus parks and the churches and the barber shops. By Sunday people were coming to the market simply to stand near Korka's stall, as though proximity to her might mean something. Korka found this deeply uncomfortable and said so to no one because there was no one she could say it to without sounding ungrateful. She kept working. She kept cooking in the evenings. She kept setting aside money in the tin under her mattress even though the immediate pressure was gone, because old habits built from real necessity do not dissolve simply because the necessity has lifted. Some structures once built become the architecture of a person, but the world around her was moving, and it was not done moving yet. On Monday, Mr. Tunde arrived at the market at 9 in the morning, carrying a leather portfolio. He sat across from Korka at the small table she kept behind her stall, and opened the portfolio with the efficient calm of a man who has delivered significant information many times and has learned to let the facts speak without theatrical assistance. 3 matters, he said. First, Chief Obiora Nwachukwu. He laid a document on the table. It was a report from a financial investigator 6 pages dense with figures. The summary at the top read clearly, Chief Obiora had been technically insolvent for 4 years. The family land debt was real, but the amount had been inflated by 40% through compounded interest calculated at a rate not specified in the original loan agreement. A rate he had applied unilaterally and retrospectively. He had done this to 7 other families in Umweza and 3 surrounding villages. All 7 cases were now in the hands of the Abia State Consumer Protection Office. "He will not be taking anyone's land," Mr. Tunde said. Korka looked at the document. She did not smile. She felt something more complicated than satisfaction, a slow, tired relief, the kind that comes not from victory, but from the ending of a long tension. "The second matter," Mr. Tunde continued producing another document, "concerns Pastor Boniface Okiki. The pastor had accepted cash payments from Chief Obura on 2 separate occasions, once to provide a character reference for the proposed marriage arrangement, and once to provide what Chief Obura had described in a text message recovered by the investigator as spiritual pressure on the widow's family. The text message also contained the amount paid 30,000 naira. The document had been forwarded to Pastor Boniface's church council the previous Friday. By Sunday morning, Pastor Boniface had been suspended pending a full review. The announcement had been made from the pulpit by the senior pastor, which meant that by Sunday afternoon everyone in Umueze already knew. He issued a statement, Mr. Tunde said, claiming the payments were donations for community development. Korka looked at him. "The text message specifies otherwise," Mr. Tunde said. She nodded once. And the third matter, Mr. Tunde closed the portfolio. Madam Ngozi Adeyemi. Ngozi had not come to the market on Saturday. This was by itself a significant event. She had not missed a Saturday in 11 years. Her absence was noticed and discussed in the particular thorough way that absences are discussed when the absent person is someone who has recently been publicly identified as having poured engine oil on a widow's doorstep. Chisholm, her assistant, had opened the stall and managed it alone, answering no questions and making eye contact with no one. The investigation into Ngozi had uncovered two things. The first was the fabric import arrangement. Ngozi had been systematically underreporting her import volumes to avoid market dues, a practice that had cost the Area Market Association approximately 200,000 naira over 3 years. The association's treasurer, once presented with the figures, had gone very quiet for a long time and then reached for his phone. The second was older and more personal. 3 years ago, a young seamstress named Adaora had rented a small workspace from Ngozi to start an alteration business. Ngozi had drawn up the rental agreement herself. The agreement contained a clause buried in paragraph 7, written in the smallest font that gave Ngozi rights to any business developed on the premises. When Adaora's business began to grow, Ngozi had invoked the clause and taken everything. Adaora had left Abba entirely. Mr. Tunde had found Adaora in Port Harcourt. She had been willing to speak. When Ngozi arrived at the market on Monday morning, she found 3 people waiting at her stall. 2 were officials from the Market Association. 1 was a lawyer Adaora had retained holding a civil suit that had been filed that morning. The market watched. Ngozi stood in front of her stall, the largest in the section, with its generator and its 3 assistants and its imported fabrics, and looked at the documents being presented to her. Her gold jewelry caught the morning light. Her face was very still. She said nothing for a long time. Then she looked across the corridor to where Korka was quietly arranging tomatoes on her plank. Korka was not watching. She was working her back, slightly turned her attention on her goods. She had not orchestrated any of this. She had not asked for it. She did not know the details of what was happening at Ngozi's stall, and would only learn them later second-hand from Mama Chidinma, who had watched everything from her crayfish stall with the focused attention of a woman who has been waiting patiently for justice for a very long time. Ngozi looked at Korka's back for a long moment. Then she turned and began speaking to the lawyer, her voice low. That afternoon, Ba Aisha came to Abba for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. She came differently this time, no plastic bags, no documents, no expression weighted with guilt. She came in her good church blouse, the one she kept for special occasions, and she walked through the market with her head up. She found Korka behind the stall and stopped. Korka looked at her mother, said nothing. Baaisha's composure held for approximately 4 seconds. Then it did not hold at all. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice broke on the second word and did not recover. "Korka, I am so sorry. I was afraid, and I was weak, and I did not trust you the way I should have. After everything you have survived, after everything you built alone, I stood in front of you and tried to sell your future for a piece of land." She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. "Your father would be ashamed of me." Korka was quiet for a moment. Then she came around the stall and put her arms around her mother. Fully, without reservation, the way she had done as a child, before the world had added its layers of complication. Ba Aisha held on hard. "You were afraid," Korka said quietly into her mother's shoulder. "Fear makes people do things. I know that." She pulled back enough to look at her mother's face. "But you will not make decisions for me again. Say it. I will not make decisions for you again." Ba Aisha said it immediately, without negotiation. "Good." Korka wiped her mother's face with the hem of her wrapper, the same gesture she used with Mama B, which was either unself-conscious or deliberate, and either way was completely Korka. "Now, come and sit down. I will buy you pepper soup from the woman at the corner, and you can tell me how the mango tree is doing." Ba Aisha laughed a wet, unsteady laugh and let herself be led. Tunde, watching from nearby, leaned toward Amara. "I told you," he whispered. "Auntie Korka always wins." Amara did not look up from her newspaper. "She did not win," she said precisely. "She endured. And then things corrected themselves. Those are different." Tunde considered this. "Same result," he said. "Different lesson," said Amara. The envelope arrived on Tuesday morning. Not through Mr. Tunde. This time Emeka brought it himself. He came to the market at the same hour he always had, wearing the same plain kaftan he had worn during the weeks of observation, carrying no nylon bag. He had no pretense of shopping today. He walked directly to Korka's stall and set the envelope on the wooden plank between the tomatoes and the ugu leaves. It was a standard white envelope, unsealed. His name was not on it. Hers was not on it either. Korka looked at it. Looked at him. "Open it when you are ready," he said. "Not before." Then he went and bought pepper from Mama Chidinma, who received him with the elaborate dignity of a woman who has decided that a billionaire buying her crayfish is simply the natural order of things correcting itself, and sat on the concrete block at the end of the lane to wait. Korka looked at the envelope for 40 minutes before she touched it. She finished serving 3 customers. She rearranged her tomatoes twice. She accepted a piece of chin-chin from the passing hawker she always bought from on Tuesdays and ate it slowly. Then she picked up the envelope, went behind the stall where the foot traffic could not reach her, and opened it. Inside was not money. It was a document 3 pages printed on foundation letterhead with architectural drawings attached. The heading read Korka House, a Center for Children ABA. Below the heading, in smaller text, proposed by the Ose Foundation in recognition of Miss Korka of Ariaria Market, whose daily act of feeding and caring for homeless children in Aba inspired this project. She turned to the architectural drawings, a building modest, practical, well-designed. Ground floor, kitchen, dining hall, medical room. First floor dormitories separated by age. A courtyard with a mango tree already drawn into the landscaping plan, the word Korka's tree written in small letters beside it in handwriting that was not the architect's. She turned to the 3rd page. Capacity 40 children. Fully funded operational costs covered for 10 years by the Ose Foundation. Staff 8 full-time. School partnership arranged with Aba Primary School No. 4. Medical partnership arranged with St. Michael's Clinic. Expected completion 4 months. The name Korka House is not negotiable. It was the first decision made. She stood behind her stall for a long time. A customer came and she served them automatically, her hands knowing what to do without requiring instruction from the rest of her. She made correct change. She said thank you. She did all the ordinary things. Then she folded the document, carefully put it back in the envelope, and walked to where Emeka was sitting on the concrete block. She sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You named it before asking me," she said. "Yes." "That is presumptuous." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." She looked at the drawing of the mango tree. "You drew a mango tree in the courtyard. You mentioned once that there was a mango tree at your mother's house, the one she planted the year you were born." He paused. "I thought every place you lived should have one." Korka pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry at her market stall in front of the tomatoes and the passing hawkers and Mama Chidinma, who was almost certainly watching from 3 feet away. She was absolutely not going to do that. She did it anyway. Briefly, quietly turning her face slightly so that only the concrete block and Emeka could see. She made no sound. 2 tears only, which she removed with the back of her hand with the same efficiency with which she removed everything that needed removing. When she turned back, Emeka was looking at the lane ahead, giving her the privacy of his redirected attention. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. They sat in silence for a moment, the comfortable kind, the kind that has been earned. Then Korka said, "Tell me about your mother." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he did. Her name had been Ngozi. He paused briefly at the coincidence of that name in this week and let it pass. And she had been from Enugu, a seamstress of considerable skill, who had married a man with ambition and very little else. When the man's business collapsed, they had moved to a small village outside Onitsha. Emeka had been 9. His mother had been sick for 2 years before she died. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could not have been treated with money and access and the basic attention of people who knew she existed. She was 41, Emeka said. She weighed 43 kilograms when she died. I weighed more than half of what she did. He said it without drama, as a fact that had lived inside him for 30 years and had long since stopped being raw. There was a woman in our compound who used to leave food outside our door twice a week. She never knocked, never announced it, just left it and went back inside. He looked at his hands. I never learned her name. My mother died before I could ask. After I built the foundation, I spent 2 years trying to find that woman. He paused. I never did. Korka listened without interrupting. When I read the letter about you, he said, it was the first time in 18 years of running this program that I felt I had to come myself. He looked at her. I needed to sit with you for a while before I understood why. Now I do. Why? She asked. Because you are what that woman in our compound was, he said simply, and I needed to know her name this time. Korka was quiet. The market moved around them, noise and color, and the ordinary machinery of 1,000 small transactions. Mama B appeared from nowhere as she always did and sat directly on Emeka's foot without ceremony. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Uncle Emeka, Mama B said. Yes. Are you going to stay now? Emeka looked at Korka. Korka looked at the envelope in her hands. At the architectural drawing with its mango tree and its 40 beds and its name that had been decided before she was asked. That, she said carefully, depends on what the private matter is that you mentioned on Friday. Emeka reached into his jacket. He produced nothing, no ring, no document, no prepared object. He had thought about those things and decided against all of them. He simply turned toward her on the concrete block until he was fully facing her. I am 42 years old, he said. I have a house in Abuja that has too many rooms and not enough people in it. I have spent 18 years finding goodness in other people and doing very little about building it in my own life. He paused. I am not a romantic man. I do not have speeches. What I have is the honest intention of someone who has watched you for 3 weeks and would like very much to keep watching you for the rest of his life if you will permit it. Korka looked at him for a long time. You argued with a 9-year-old about egusi stew, she said. I stand by my position. You sat on a concrete block for 3 weeks eating porridge and told no one who you were. The porridge was excellent. You drew a mango tree on an architectural plan. I did. She looked at the envelope, looked at him. Outside, the afternoon light was coming in golden, and sideways between the stall rooftops the same light that sometimes made her go very still, listening for something she knew she would not hear. This time, she did not go still. She exhaled. I have conditions, she said. I expected nothing less. The children come with me, all of them. Not to a separate facility with me where I can see them. Gorka House has a residence wing, he said immediately. It was designed that way. My mother lives nearby. Abba or Umueze, whichever she prefers. I keep my stall. He blinked. You want to keep selling vegetables? I like selling vegetables. A pause. You can keep your stall. She nodded slowly the way she nodded when a price negotiation had concluded fairly. Tunde had materialized beside them, appearing, as always, at maximum inconvenience. He looked at Emeka with the suspicious assessment of a boy who takes his responsibilities seriously. Uncle Emeka, he said, are you going to be our father now? Emeka looked at Korka. Korka looked at Tunde. Go and help Amara with her reading. She does not need help, she is better than me now. Then go and let her teach you something. Tunde considered the dignity implications of this. Then he turned to Emeka with finality. I want a goosey stew at the wedding, he said. Not bitter leaf. He walked away. Mama B, still on Emeka's foot, looked up at Korka. I want both, she said. The wedding was small. Korka had been clear about this from the beginning, and Emeka had learned in the months between the concrete block and the ceremony that when Korka was clear about something, the most productive response was to listen carefully and then execute it exactly. She was not a woman who said things she did not mean, which meant she was also not a woman who needed to be persuaded out of things she had decided. Small meant 30 people. Family, the children, Mama Chidinma, Mr. Tunde Fashola, and 3 of the foundation staff who had become familiar faces in Abba over the preceding months. It took place at a small church 2 streets from the market. The same church Korka had attended alone every Sunday since Emmanuel died, where the pastor knew her name, and the pew she always sat in, and the fact that she put in the offering even in weeks she could not afford to. The pastor cried during the ceremony, which surprised everyone except Korka, who had always suspected he was softer than he appeared. Korka's dress was ivory, not elaborate, not simple, exactly right. She had sewn it herself over 3 weeks at the small table in her hut in the evenings after the children were asleep. Ba Aisha had sat beside her each night handing her pins, saying very little, doing the quiet penance of a woman who has understood what her silence is worth. Tunde served as ring-bearer. He performed this duty with the seriousness of a general overseeing a military operation, walking at exactly the correct pace, eyes forward, the small cushion held at precisely the right height. He had practiced for 6 days. Mama B was the flower girl. She'd scattered petals for approximately 4 steps, decided she preferred holding them, and spent the rest of the processional clutching the basket to her chest and looking at the congregation with enormous dignity. Amara sat in the front pew in a yellow dress she had chosen herself. She had a new newspaper in her lap, not to read, just to have. Some habits are comfort, not necessity. Bisi did not cough once during the entire ceremony. Korka House opened 4 months after the wedding on a Thursday morning in early Harmattan, when the air was clean and sharp and the sky was the particular deep blue of dry season. The building was modest and solid cream-painted walls, a wide covered veranda, a courtyard with red sand swept smooth. In the center of the courtyard stood a young mango tree freshly planted, its roots packed carefully into the Abba earth. 40 children moved in over 3 days. Tunde immediately established which dormitory bed was his, and which was not a process that involved considerable negotiation, and one near-diplomatic incident that required Korka's intervention. Mama B chose a bed next to the window, arranged her few belongings on the small shelf beside it with the precision of someone who has never before had a shelf of their own, and sat on the mattress for a long time without saying anything. Korka found her there that first evening. "Are you all right?" Korka asked. Mama B looked at the shelf, at the window, at the mattress beneath her. "It is mine," she asked. "It is yours." Mama B considered this with the gravity it deserved. Then she lay down, pulled the blanket over herself, and went to sleep at 6:30 in the evening, the sleep of a child who has finally put down something very heavy. Korka stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she turned off the light. Korka kept her stall. She was there every morning by 5:30 arranging tomatoes on the wooden plank, shifting her crates to make room for Mama Chidinma, buying her pepper from the woman with the blue umbrella at the bus park junction. The market knew her differently now. There was a new quality to the way people greeted her, something between respect and the particular warmth reserved for people who have been proven right. But the work itself was the same. She had been offered multiple times a reason to stop. She declined each time with the same simple explanation: "I like the work." What she did not say, because it was not the kind of thing she said aloud, was that the market was the place where she had built herself back from nothing. The stall was not just commerce. It was evidence of her own capacity, her own sufficiency, the life she had constructed from the specific raw materials of grief and stubbornness, and the refusal to be diminished. You do not walk away from evidence like that simply because you no longer need it to survive. Emeka came to the market every Saturday without fail. He bought tomatoes he did not need and argued with Tunde about stew, and sat on the concrete block drinking tea from a flask, watching the market move around him with the expression of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. He had a foundation to run and a conglomerate to manage and properties in 3 cities. None of that had changed. What had changed was that Abba was now on his itinerary in a way it had never been before, penciled in not as a business matter but as a return. Mr. Tunde Fashola, who had managed the chairman's schedule for 18 years, noted privately that the Abba trips were the only appointments the chairman never rescheduled. On the 6-month anniversary of Korka House, Korka cooked. Not for a function, not for a photographer, she simply cooked in the large kitchen with the industrial stove and the new aluminium pots that were not dented on the side. She made ogi with groundnuts, the same porridge she had been making over a kerosene flame on a flat stone for years. The children lined up as they always had, smallest first, Tunde last. Emeka stood at the back of the kitchen watching. After the children had eaten, Korka filled a bowl and handed it to him. He tasted it. "It is exactly the same," he said. "Of course it is," she said. "Better stove, bigger kitchen, new pots." "Same hands," she said simply. "Same recipe, same reason." He looked at her across the kitchen, at the woman who had fed strangers from her own hunger, who had swept refuse from her path without bitterness, who had built a life from almost nothing. And then, when something came to fill it, had held it with the same careful, unhurried hands she used for everything. He thought about the woman in his mother's compound whose name he had never learned. He knew her name now. That evening, after the children were in bed and the kitchen was clean and the Harmattan wind had picked up outside and was moving through the mango tree in the courtyard with a dry, papery sound, Korka sat on the veranda steps. Emeka sat beside her. They did not talk. They listened to the wind and the distant noise of Abba settling into its evening generator's music from somewhere, the bark of a dog, the steady pulse of a city that never truly stopped. After a long while, Tunde appeared at the door behind them in his pajamas. "I cannot sleep," he announced. "Yes, you can," Korka said. "The wind is too loud. The wind is the same as always." A pause. "Can I sit here for a small time?" Korka moved over on the step. Tunde sat between them, pulling his knees to his chest. Within 4 minutes he was asleep, his head against Korka's arm, his breath the slow and even breath of a child who is safe. Emeka looked at him, then at Korka. She was looking at the mango tree. Kindness never goes unwitnessed. The wind moved through the leaves. The city hummed. The tree stood young and rooted in Abba soil, growing the way all patient things grow slowly toward light without announcement.